They were thought to be extinct. They're that rare. They were first described by Dr. Livingstone's, hence the Livingstone's fruit bat. They're also called the Comorian black flying fox. But they were thought to be extinct. They weren't seen for many decades. And then they were sort of rediscovered in the late 1980s. That's why, back in that time, Durrell Wildlife decided that we need to go out and do a collecting trip to get some of these bats to bring them back into captivity, because the sort of wild prognosis for the species in the wild was so bad that we needed to create this conservation safety net population. And from those 3 collecting trips we brought in 18 animals which formed the founder population for this breeding program. They're one of the largest of the fruit bats. They come from only 2 tiny islands at the top of the Mozambique Channel, close to Madagascar. Those 2 islands form part of the Comores group. They're the only fruit bats that have these lovely rounded Mickey Mouse ears, have these gorgeous big orange eyes, and they live high up in the mountains in Anjouan and Mohili. Out of all the mammal species there are on the planet, bats are probably the greatest athletes. They have their hearts and their lungs are sort of 50% bigger by body mass, than any other mammal species. They are incredible athletes. The enclosure that you see here, this roost, the island bat roost, was a polytunnel that we put up in 2003. It was a 40-metre long polytunnel, just a single polytunnel, and we put 3 layers of bubble wrap inside. So it was just like this giant tube of bubble wrap, basically, and it did the job. But obviously, not much light got through because there were so many layers of bubble wrap, and lots of algae started growing on the walls, and it looked a bit tired. So we thought we've got to do an upgrade here. What we did was we didn't have much money. We rarely have much money, so we thought, well, what are you going to do? I'll tell you what, let's get volunteers to help us. And let's build it out of recycled materials. Let's make it into the sort of recycled ark. So it was a sort of sustainable project. And so that's what we did. And so that worked. It was great. And so the bats were flying down this long 40-metre building that was, we could control the climate inside here a lot better. And we were starting to be successful. So we thought, crikey, we need to increase the size of this. We need to double the size, and I'll tell you what, then we can actually have continuous flight, because the sort of turning arc of one of these big Livingstone's fruit bats, they need a bit of a turning arc. So 2 40-metre tunnels alongside each other gave us that sort of elongated donut shape, if you like. So we have this bats that can fly in this great big donut, and we've seen bats in here fly over half a mile, which is fantastic. And it's been absolutely revolutionary in terms of the health of the bats, the breeding of the bats. And I think in terms of the people looking at the bats and seeing the bats and how they perceive the bats has been wonderful, because they can see them in the daylight and they see how beautiful their faces are, and they can see mothers interacting with their pups. And then in the afternoon they have this wonderful spectacle of these giant bats flying around. And when they leave the enclosure, after staying for probably 5 to 10 minutes, oh, I didn't know they looked like that. They've got lovely faces, haven't they? And they say these wonderful things. Someone, I remember, remarked, they're black angels, really, aren't they? I thought that was great. Black angels. And they are. They're the angels that we need now. People have a close encounter with the Livingstone's fruit bat. I think their abiding memory will be probably of a sort of a robust upside-down teddy bear that keeps nagging them for food. No, they're wonderful animals. They're very, very affectionate with each other. They show a very, very broad behavioural repertoire. The mothers devote so much time to bring up their single infant, and the baby bat is called pup. Invest months and months bringing up that single infant. If you think about it, that's very much like humans. Huge amount of investment into one single infant. And they're all different. They've got incredible characters. They've all got different names here, and that's very, very important for us to be able to manage the colony. Do we manage it on an individual basis? And they've all got their own idea and names. And they are indeed incredibly different in their personalities. The captive breeding program is incredibly important. And the reason is because the bats are at such low numbers in the wild now. When we're talking about less than 1,000 now, probably in several roosts around those two islands. When a species gets so low in numbers, you can have these sudden events, fires, as we've seen terrible fires around the world recently, storms that can have devastating effects on those numbers when they're so low. I mean, we're sort of very close to that point of extinction. Last year there was a big typhoon, hurricane that hit the east coast of Africa, Hurricane Kenneth. That unfortunately tracked over the Comoro Islands before it slammed into the side of Africa. That, we think, took out 30%. We haven't managed to do a proper count, our colleagues in the Comores, yet, but it took out 30% of the wild population. Unfortunately, it's one of those things. We have to do this. We have to think about the long-term situation for these species that are unfortunately so very, very rare. And at the same time, people can see how wonderful these animals are, and it will connect them to those wild places. And the bigger picture about what we need to do in the environment and sustainability. So it's so important. But in terms of where we are with this captive breeding program, although we've had them in captivity for a long time, because they were so difficult to breed in the early days, we really need to push on now and get our numbers up to 300-400 animals. The ultimate goal, I think, is to restore the wild population. So while we can hold this population here, we know we have the bat species, and if the worst happened in the wild, we could reintroduce these bats into the wild. And what we would hopefully do is set up a system similar, like an enclosure similar to this, to have bats breeding in a large enclosure on the island, in the country of origin, and so that we could do a sort of a soft release from that situation. So if you like, this is a prototype. We're doing exactly the same thing in the Comoros. But what we need to do is to build that capacity. So what we're doing is training personnel from the Comoro Islands to work with the bats and learn all about how to work with them in captivity. And that's ultimately to sort of have this sort of setup there. And then we could have the bats here as ambassadors. Some of the bats here as ambassadors for the islands and the ecosystems there. The worst case, they would go extinct. I mean, so if there's no one working on the ground doing conservation work, restoration work, and the forests are really small, we've seen those fires. They're gone in a weekend. No, literally, we lost some routes to Hurricane Kenneth, and we lost some bats. What if you get 3 hurricanes in a row, bang, 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 with high intensity? They're gone. And so when they're gone, what do we say? Oh, we should have set up a conservation breeding population. Once they're gone, you can't, obviously. But we're getting great success now. We've got these bats, and we will restore them. And we know we can do that because we've restored the Rodrigues fruit bat. The Rodrigues fruit bat was very, very low in numbers, and now is up in 20,000 animals on the island of Rodrigues. What a fantastic success story that is. To lose, one of the most gorgeous and wonderful species, it would be an absolute tragedy. Totally heartbreaking to see such a wonderful animal disappear and be no more. I mean, there's been a lot of extinctions through the years, but surely, to lose this majestic animal just purely to our own fault, when we actually know what we need to do and how to stop it. So me and everybody else are going to try like mad to make sure that never happens. And we know we can do it. If we can just stop the destructive habits that we have, change, just wait, we can see nature bounce back. And wonderful animals like the Livingstone's fruit bat that we all want to see live on into the future. We want this species that's critically endangered to be another bat species that isn't endangered. That's the dream. Get it down from being critically endangered right down to least concern, so we don't have to worry about it anymore. If the Livingstone's fruit bats were to be returned back to the wild, that would be, in many ways, it would be a sort of culmination of decades and decades of work. It would just be the most uplifting, wonderful experience to see that, and I hope one day to see that. It would have to be a very soft release, but it would be the ultimate, wouldn't it, to restore a keystone species, the incredibly important Livingstone's fruit bat, back to those forests where it once was, to breed with wild Livingstone's fruit bats. Amazing, absolutely amazing.